this has been a theme I've been covering for months now. Both parties are in lockstep on China policy. And it's actually unhinged that you have the people on the right that pretend that Biden is weak on China. He's sending arms to Taiwan. He sent nuclear submarines to Australia and South Korea. He persuaded Japan to increase their military budget by around 45% in order to prepare for war against China. He engaged in trade wars that even Donald Trump went engaged. I reported on this months ago. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on this push by the United States to escalate and create a war with China. And you guys will know what I mean by that when I show you guys this clip. But they are trying to create and manufacture a war. I'll start with Carlos this time and go, Eddie. What are your guys' general thoughts before I move on with the segment regarding the United States push aggression against China?
Well, yeah, similar to Russia, China represents the potential of a new world, which is in many ways more radical than Russia because it's led by a communist party, has more explicitly the interests of its people in mind, and it's a communist society constructing socialism. So it's the threat that it presents, if it's the new world order that all countries strive to be like, is a lot more existential for the capitalist system than just Russia. But what I notice is that whereas before in the first Cold War, you had these very silly stories that were crafted to instill fear of the Soviet Union in the American people, and they would be like debunked by mainstream media years or sometimes decades down the line. What I think is interesting is that a lot more people are smelling these lies that are being manufactured to instill fear and legitimize this war drive against China. And a good example of that is the spy balloon. It was all over the news February, all over the news. And then in June, I believe, the official that was implying that it was a spy balloon admitted that it wasn't a spy balloon. And then this month, the mainstream media has covered, not with the same intensity as February, the fact that it was basically all fabricated and bullshit. So that means that within a matter of around 7 months, this lie that was very important in building up the hysteria against China, which is how the state achieves consent in its war against China, this lie was debunked within 7 months. And that wasn't for no reason. That was because they realized that they affect themselves by perpetuating something that the vast majority of people with a little bit of common sense realize is bullshit. So I think that part of China represents a threat in a way that the Soviet Union never was able to get to that level. And at the same time, because of the objective conditions getting worse than they've ever been for our generation of Americans, people are much more skeptical to the narratives of the state that are spinned in order to obtain their consent for war. So it's a real existential situation, the one that we're seeing for the U.S. empire. Its enemy is a lot better. It's the enemy of the elite. Now for Americans, it's a lot better than the old enemy when it was the Soviet Union. And its people are a lot less willing to consent to these wars. So that it's that dynamic of the crisis that the U.S. faces abroad and the crisis that it faces, the crisis of legitimacy with its people, that it's bound to bring it down at some point unless there's a radical revolutionary transformation of the country.
Yeah, I want to, before I get to Eddie, just for a second time, I want to show a little bit of this clip and show you guys the state of the propaganda and the ridiculous arguments that they're making. I'm going to try to get to this real quick.
Listen. Open lines of communication. It comes as the Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, is warning that China has been modernizing its military to, quote, design a force with the intention of having the ability to deter and, if necessary, defeat U.S. intervention in the Western Pacific.
Let's bring it right
How
now,
dare they?
General Julian
How dare? How dare a country modernize their military? How dare a country care about their national defense? Oh, so scary. It's so scary. They went away. We had multiple NATO officials, multiple United States politicians that say they're preparing to go to war with China over Taiwan. Multiple UK politicians talking about, hey, the upcoming war with China. The West talking about war with China. So China like, hey, man, West talking about the war a lot. Maybe we should beef up our military a bit. So then after China beefs the military up because they see the West is sending weapons to Taiwan, trying to start war with Taiwan, the West then turn around and say, how dare you increase your military presence as they send nuclear submarines to Australia, as they send nuclear submarines to South Korea, as Japan increased the military budget by 40% in a historic increase. China, how dare you do the same? I'll just play a little bit more. I'm just trying to speed this up for the sake of time, but I'll let it continue.
Under the Secretary of the Air Force and International Affairs. Thank you so much, General, for being with us. All right, so lay it out for us. So what's China preparing for?
Well, first of all, good morning, Joe and Mika. Thank you for having me on the show, especially on the Air Force birthday.
You guys see the whole premise of this segment to scare liberal boomers into thinking that China's about to wage war against us. Be afraid. That's the whole point of the segment.
Whatever China's
76?
preparing, we will be 76 years young. The United States will be ready. And, one thing to keep in mind is that we have strong alliances with our allies and partners who are able to deter aggression. And certainly conflict is not inevitable in this region. But it is concerning about this aggressive behavior, and we want to follow international
The
rules.
aggressive behavior of modernizing your military and protecting your territorial sovereignty. You have the West, the United States have both in the South Chinese Sea, and they complain about Chinese aggression in the South Chinese Sea. You want to know how aggressive the United States would be if there were Chinese ships going through the Gulf of Mexico? Anyway, for a second time, because we run out of time, I'm going to go to the Fox clip because it's the same theme. And I'm showing you guys both of these because, once again, the idea that comes from the dumb left, the dumb establishment, is that MSNBC is the left, Fox News is the right. Now, you're going to see in the segment, Fox out, they definitely go in a more unhinged direction. Liberals know how to hide how unhinged they are. They go all out. So I'm going to play this real quick, and I'm going to get Eddie and you guys in before we wrap up.
Look who's back with us. Retired Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano. He's Vice President of Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. It's good to see you, Colonel. Okay, what do you make of the Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, saying in a speech in Maryland that, quote, the intelligence could not be clearer. China is preparing for war with the U.S., but that it's not inevitable. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's almost like a duh moment. I mean, anybody, forget about the intelligence assessment. Just look at the unclassified information. China is developing the capabilities to have a war with the United States, and not a defensive war. This is an offensive war to take it to the United States.
Not a defensive war, an offensive war where they're going to take it to the United States. They got boomers scared as hell watching this right now. Just like, as you explained, Carlos, Russia views Ukraine as an existential threat. China views Taiwan and Western encroachment on Taiwan, militarizing Taiwan as an existential threat. If you do not want war with China, maintain the status quo of the one China policy, which 80% of Taiwanese people support. There are Taiwanese people who have criticisms of China, but they support the status quo because economically it's good for them and good for China. So I'll play just a few more of this and I'll get your guys' last thoughts. I don't want to keep you guys too late, but I'll play just a little bit more and I'll get you guys in here.
Just look at their strategic capabilities, look at their military spending and investments, which actually are on par with the United States. So, of course, they're developing this capability. But what I'd say is this is not like Germany in 1914 or 1939. This is not we're going to attack somebody at a set date in the future. This is much more like what the Soviet Union did. We're going to build a massive offensive capability. We're going to use it to cow and threaten other people. But you know what?
Really?
There might come a day if our enemies look weak when we might actually use that.
How?
And well, by actually going on a conventional war against the United States or its friend and allies in some place.
No
If
nuance.
they
They're
thought-
not even do the nuance like the Morning Joe channel. That's the difference. That's like Fox News. Like, no, they're just going to war with us. How? I don't know. These motherfuckers gonna invade. They be in L.A. They're gonna invade Utah. Do people really believe this? This guy literally saying that China about to wage essentially an unprovoked conventional war with the United States for no reason. I'll play that part again. I'll get you guys in here because I know you guys chomping at the bit to comment on this.
Against the United States or its friend and allies in some place, if they thought they could get away with it. But this is the old George C. Marshall thing. If you want peace, prepare for war. Is the way to stem that threat is not to put your head in the sand, not to try to dismiss it and say, oh, the Chinese economy is slowing down. They never do that, or this makes no sense. It's to build the conventional and strategic deterrent capability. So when the Chinese look at the numbers and they go, this is just not smart. If we'd done that with Germany in 1939, they would have never marched past the Rhineland.
So what?
There's a lot to say on that. For a second time, I just want to get you guys in here. Let's start with Eddie this time. Any thoughts on the insanity that you've seen on both MSNBC and Fox News? I know there are a lot of comments on, so take it wherever you want to take it, Eddie.
For sure, it's insanity, but it's not surprising. Coincidentally, I'm reading Michael Parenti's Inventing Reality right now, which is a Marxist analysis of the American news media. And what you'll notice is the experts that they bring on to talk about this aren't professors and academics like Roland Bohr, who we interviewed on the Midwestern Marx YouTube a week ago, who's who lives in China and has studied China the last 20 years. No, they bring on an Air Force general and a guy from the Heritage Foundation, which is like the crown jewel of the Koch brothers network of think tanks that they've created to push neocon, neoliberal ideology, essentially. So they're not bringing on experts. They're bringing on propagandists, and this is both sides. This is MSNBC and Fox News, who are both owned by the capitalist class, who have in their interest expanding their profits and expanding the American empire. And if you want to look at why the U.S. views China as such an existential threat, just look at their foreign policy. It's different from what the Soviet Union did, counter to what that expert on Fox News said. The Soviet Union basically said, we will be a base for socialist countries, so socialism can come to, basically we can have revolutions everywhere in the world, and every country can move towards socialism, and we're going to bankroll and support revolutionary movements around the world. China said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to outsource revolution. China does not outsource revolution. Our foreign policy is one of mutual development and complete non-interventionism, meaning there are no strings attached with the developmental loans that China is giving to countries in Africa and countries who have been under the boot of imperialism for years. And we know from Lenin's imperialism that what capitalist imperialism does is stop countries from developing their productive forces, stops them from developing industry. So what China's coming in and doing is financing all these countries' industry, with no strings attached, saying we're not going to mess with your political system the same way the IMF, World Bank, and the U.S. dominated global financial system has done for years. And it's giving countries a completely new paradigm for how they can conduct foreign relations and how they can conduct trade and how foreign policy can be conducted on a global scale. You don't have to be an empire. You can develop relations of mutual development. We build up your industry so we can trade goods with you and we can have more commerce. It's the opposite of how imperialism works, which is holding a country's productive forces, arresting them, stopping them from advancing so that you can exploit and steal all that country's resources. So China's offering a completely new paradigm for trade and foreign policy and really leading the world into the future as the U.S. empire is dying and throwing a hissy fit as they, I don't want to say fizzle out because that makes it seem like we're closer to the collapse of empire than we probably are, but throwing a hissy fit as another country rises up to challenge U.S. hegemony.
Carlos, what's your thoughts? And why do you think there's this panic and this desperation to get the Americans to want to go to war with China?
Well, it's absurd. It's if you take it to the individual level, it's like if you have a skinny kid who keeps hearing that this big built guy from across the street is going to come and fuck them up in a week. And then you have some guy that looks at the skinny kid working out or watching YouTube videos trying to learn how to fight. And they're like, how audacious is he? He's preparing for this offensive. No, man. They've been waging war against China. And it's been intensified since the pivot to Asia. And China knows this. So it's a defensive preparation. But they got to spin it and spin it and spin it. And I love this part. Ironically. But I love this part that specifically the second interview you showed did, which is they kept on bringing it back to Germany. In the first part they mentioned...
I knew you wanted to say something about that.
The first part they mentioned World War One and then World War Two, and then the second part they dropped the World War One part and they just stuck with 1939 Germany. And what are you doing there, right? If you're trying to develop a new object of fear, that's what fear is. Fear is always conjoined to an object. That's the difference with like fear and anxiety. Anxiety is just like this general thing. You can't pinpoint what anxiety is coming from, but fear is rooted in objects. So if you want to connect the object of China to fear in people's brains, a very effective way of doing that is connecting that object to another object they already fear, right? So if you bring up China in conjunction with Hitler's Germany, you're doing that very, very effectively. And it's producing the ideological ends that you want, which is to produce this fear that allows people to consent to the US's war with China, which is a war that is not in the interest of the American people. That's why they have to lie. The only reason they lie is because it's not in our interest. Our lives are getting worse. They're getting more immiserated, more desperate, more indebted. What the fuck do we have to do with China? Nothing. The only threat that China presents is a threat to our elite class, which is one that we should frankly welcome because they're the same people fucking our lives up. So, and you also get this myth that he brought up, a slowing Chinese economy. You know the audacity you have to have in order to talk about a slowing Chinese economy? Go check out the recent article that John Ross did for Morningstar, I think, the paper of the Communist Party of Great Britain. Anywhere from, I think, 4 to 460 has been the range of growth of GDP that China has had in comparison to the most developed capitalist countries. The US, Britain, Japan, China, France, Germany. So when you're in a condition where this country is growing anywhere from like 4 to 460 times more than you, the balls you have to talk about, oh, they're slowing down. It's completely absurd and delusional and not rooted in any facts.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I did stories debunking that, and you see this all the time if you look at their propaganda. They said the Chinese economy is slowing. The Chinese economy is slowing as you have millions homeless here, millions can't afford health care, millions can't afford food. But they talking about how slow the Chinese economy are, even though they're making milestone after milestone on infrastructure. It's absolute trash.